You trimmed your beard too.
I trimmed my beard too.
I trimmed mine way too much. I tried this little razor thing and it was no bueno. But
well, I'm sure both of our wives like the look of us now, huh? And your head is extra shaved.
it is. This is my new hairstyle. The balder I get, the more I just shave the whole thing. Welcome back to another episode of Bearded Bible Brothers. I am your lightly bearded Matt. I trimmed up way closer than I expected to be, but I'm Matt.
And I'm your bearded host, Josiah, who's also freshly trimmed.
Yes.
I'm not as trimmed as you are. I don't have it close to the skin, but I did cut off 8.5 inches of beard.
Yeah.
So
I would make a joke about it being our summer cuts, but it's September, so that doesn't really work. Right. We are freshly shorn, but we still are technically bearded, so we don't have to restart this entire podcast with a different name. Exactly. And I really don't anticipate either of us going completely beardless.
No. I don't. Actually, my wife has told let me tell you, I got a quick story. You okay with that?
Of course.
Okay, of course. Heather and I were, we were dating. Yeah, we were dating at the time. And she had been saying to me, hey, what would it look like with you without a beard? And I was like, well, I can surprise her with this. I'm the one that's the thing. I like surprises. She doesn't. And yet I've been surprising her for 13 years or 14 rather.
Hopefully, so you were just dating at the time, but later you realize that there's a subtle difference between, hey, what would this look like? And I want to see it.
Yes, exactly.
One is more of a hypothesis. The other is a request.
Right. But I unfortunately timed it for when her mother came for a visit. She went, no! My mother's gonna see you like this. No. And I was like,
so apparently she didn't love it.
No, she didn't. And but apparently her mother did. She knew her mother well enough to realize if she sees you without a beard, she is going to imagine you without that beard for however long. And she did. Heather said, I don't want anybody thinking I robbed the cradle. Put the beard back on. I mean, right now, it looks like, that 10 years have been taken off of my face. I look a little younger. So do you. You look a little younger and spraighter. Yep. But with the beard completely off, I have such a baby face that it bothers Heather immensely. But the beard bothered my mother-in-law for 2 straight years. And she kept saying, you'd look so much better without it off. And then she'd get to the 2-year mark and she looks at me one day and says, Josiah, don't cut the beard off. You look better with it.
So finally, like, 2 years later, everyone was in agreement.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, okay.
Yep.
Here's me.
Christy and I had been married just over a year. The first and only time that she ever saw me without a beard at all. And I don't think she had requested it. I don't remember. I think I just got a wild hair and decided to cut it all off. She felt so much like she had robbed the cradle that she made me either stand behind a door to talk to her or wear a bandana like an old-timey outlaw that would cover my face.
No, she didn't.
Yeah.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yep. Fortunately, I grow like 5 o'clock shadow by 10:30 a.m. So it was only like for that evening. And then the next morning I had enough stubble that she could stomach it. But
I know what we're going to bring up our next the wives that we have them back on an episode. That'll be fun.
Oh, man. But, I think you need to also tell the story that you just told me before we started recording about how you went about trimming your beard this time.
Oh, sure.
and
Okay.
your children's involvement.
So not this past weekend, but the weekend before, we're sitting at the dinner table, and Heather mentions that she would like the husband back that she married. So I thought, well, I can understand that. And she said,
She
I've been
wasn't talking about like you weren't helping around the house or showing her
no,
affection. She
no,
was talking specifically about the stuff hanging from your chin.
exactly. So she says, I've been trying to be supportive. She says, I know you like it and you're enjoying it. That was not, she actually said, I was not expecting you to enjoy it so much. Okay. But she just said, I'd really like to have you back. The guy I married, the guy that's not so old looking. It's like, oh, thanks.
Well, she just said it, didn't she?
She said it the way she thought it. So I was thinking about it, and I decided to recruit my kids because my kids were already saying how much they liked the beard and they wanted me to keep it. But when I suggested to them that they help me cut the beard off, then they changed their minds. So Carly runs outside and gets mommy from the garage. Mommy's coming in, and I hunker down right in front of the back door. I've got my phone camera recording right here, and the kids have one each side of my beard, holding it with a pair of scissors right at it. She walks in the door and snip. And Heather's look was, ah!
She was overjoyed.
She was until so I said, so I left the middle part because she says, before you actually, she said, I know months ago, we'll have to measure it before you fully cut it off. So I said, okay, now it's time to measure. So she measured 8.5 inches. That was a very long beard, longest I've ever had it. And then I said, great, now it's your turn to cut some off. She goes, no. I said, yep. Carly walked up to her, handed her her pair of scissors, and said, here, mommy, you can use mine. And so Heather very gently cut off the middle parts.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah. And it was fun had by all.
Good. Oh my goodness. Meanwhile, I just stand in the bathroom with my clippers and go, and then I'm done.
Hey, I feel the same way. Those moments where you just got to trim everything up. Although I have to say, having done that, my beard is kind of filled in a little bit more.
Nice.
Yeah, it's definitely filled in. But I really like the casualness of our opening to this week's podcast, because this is just so lighthearted, talking about beards and family being involved. Because we're going to talk about something very lonely and very other not family.
Yes, and now for something completely different. So we gave a shout out a little while ago that we got an email from a listener, and we I think we said on the podcast that this listener asked the question about homelessness and LGBTQ plus and being believers and disciples of Jesus, of Yeshua. How do we love those two different groups well and effectively, without judgment, but without compromising on what we believe and stuff like that? So we gave a shout out because we didn't want anybody to think we weren't getting the emails or reading them, but we also haven't addressed it yet because we wanted to finish our study of the book of Joel. But so for today, we're going to discuss the homelessness one, and then next episode we're going to discuss the other one. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump from the bearded end to the deep end and talk about homelessness. So Josiah graciously has offered to tell his personal story regarding homelessness. So take it away, sir.
Well, not to bring the mood down too much, I will try to keep this as light as possible, given that it is going to be a heavy subject. Because when we talk about homelessness, any number of us can come up with images that we've seen, both firsthand and secondhand, as well as through just random stories, which is actually what our listener said. He says, I've just heard so many stories and it just makes me question it. And it's like, you know what? That makes sense. So for me, I uh I was at a very dark place in my life, and this was in summer of 2005. And I was
And
working in
this was
national.
before you were married or had kids,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah. Long before I was married, long before I had kids, I'd been working in national parks at this point for about 3+ years, and I was enjoying it a lot. But at the same time, I was suffering with an internal world that was in complete chaos. And I was working at Yellowstone National Park, and I remember one day just finally saying, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I cannot continue to put on a face, put on a life that makes it seem like I'm capable of doing this. And so I went to my boss, said, I'm giving you my notice. And they said, well, as a matter of fact, we do need to, it's toward the end of the season. We need to start laying people off. So do you want to do the 2 week or leave right now? I was like, well, you know what? Let's just leave right now. Let's just cut this off now. And it was not, it was easy, but it wasn't easy. It felt like I was giving up on life. Now, before I get going anymore, I want to say this, that there are various reasons that people become homeless. Some are emotionally driven, financially driven, loss driven, and it can be a combination of those three as well as any other. There's in a number of ways, including drug addiction, unfortunately. So that can be a big one. But for me, it was not drug related. It wasn't truly loss related, even though I had lost a very close mentor before that. Shortly before that, a couple of years before that, I had lost a gentleman who, in one of our previous episodes on mentors, John Cowan, had passed away, and it felt like part of me died with him. It was very hard to see him go, but it was primarily emotionally driven because my life was in emotional chaos. I had been suicidal up to that point. This is in 2005. In January of 2001, I had tried to kill myself, and it was, according to the doctors, a success. Although I'm still sitting here today, which is a success of God and not my own, and I thank Him for that every single day. But it was an event that was never addressed, whether in therapy or by family or by friends. I had people address it all right, but not in a positive way. Let's put it that way.
Sorry, just for clarification, do you mean the suicide attempt was an event
Yeah,
not addressed, or the
correct.
trauma before that that led you to become suicidal? Or
That as
both?
well. That's a great question. That as well. Though neither of those were actually dealt with. As a matter of fact, the trauma leading up to the suicide attempt was not only not addressed, I was shipped off. I was shipped off to, quote unquote, to a change of scenery. That's what it was, to a change of scenery. And it didn't help. It wasn't addressing it. It was burying it. It was,
Right.
and unfortunately, that just added trauma onto trauma. And I was taught to run by that. Actually, it was a lesson of, okay, just run from your problems, and that just doesn't solve anything. So there are, as I said earlier, there's different reasons why people go into homelessness, and homelessness can be very despairing. It can make people very despondent. You feel like you're in a hole. No one sees you. No one cares about you. And you do feel like that empty space on a sidewalk, that occasionally somebody will see the cup and they'll go, oh, I'll just give them a couple of bucks and go, yay. I never did what's known as panhandling. And I never did that. Although I had the desire and I understood why somebody would do that, but I knew it was going to take me to an odd place if I started begging people for money. So I never did it. And I'm not going to get into the details of that. You don't need that. But what I will get into the detail of is that what I did get into was a lot of rumination, just thinking deeply on myself and my problems.
Right.
And
Introspection.
introspection, and taking that out on myself. I was it's called a self-mutilation. I was cutting myself on a daily basis. I have scars up and down my arms and my legs. Forgive me, it may seem like it's easy to talk about this, but sometimes it's not. But at the same time, I want people to be able to hear this. I've been very intentional about how and when and where I share my story. And I think this is a good place to do it, because when it comes to homelessness, it's not so much an alien thing. We don't have to treat it as if it's well, we don't have to treat it with kid gloves. We can address this. We can talk about it. And so, long story short, I ended up bouncing around places. I was in my car, but even though I wasn't panhandling, I started stealing from friends and family members, extended family members, people that I hadn't seen in a very long time. And I have since apologized to them about that and addressed it, and actually made restitution on those matters years ago. And thankfully, the majority of those people are actually still in my life in some way or another, in a very positive way. But I had gotten to a point where I was so suicidal again that I was writing notes and leaving it in my car. That way, if I did commit suicide, somebody would find it and they'd know what happened. But the element of homelessness that a lot of people, I've actually heard the phrase, "Oh, they're just taking a break from life," or "they don't want to face life." It's not that they don't want to face life; they don't know how to face life. Their reality and world, my reality and world. I'm going to keep this personal because I can't speak to everyone else, but my reality and world was one where it wasn't me against the world. It was me against me.
Right.
And it was a constant reminder on a daily basis that I'm not fighting with the police who are telling me to move on. I'm not fighting with the family member that I just stole from and now I've got to run away from. I'm fighting with this element of myself that is so destructive that it's ready to take my own life, whether I want it to or not. And there is elements of that is completely self-serving. I've grown to believe, even after 15 years of being in suicide prevention, of helping people with fighting suicide, is that suicide is selfish, but it's not selfish for the reasons people think that it is. People think it's intentionally selfish. It's not. It's where things have been so inverted that you become your own echo chamber. And as a result of that, you're led to believe one thing: I'm completely meaningless. I'm so disconnected. I don't even know where to go, that the only thing that makes sense is for me to end the nightmare.
Yeah. Either the only thing that makes sense or the only way I could possibly find relief.
Exactly. And not only find relief for myself, but also in a lot of ways, I know this sounds odd, but this was the world I was in. If I do this now, I can end the suffering of my friends and family.
Right. Because most suicidal people feel very much like a burden on their friends and family.
Correct. And one of the reasons why I went to homelessness. Now, I know that it seems inextricably linked that I'm homeless, suicidal. Sometimes those can go hand in hand. But then again, and what I'm wanting to emphasize here is echo chambers. Let's emphasize that for a second. Because when you're looking at homelessness, you're looking at a person who is so much involved in themselves, not intentionally, but is just by habit and by structure and happenstance, that they are just so involved with themselves. And this is just, again, one element of homelessness, that this is the only route they end up going. They become their own counselor. They become their own family, even. I'm not talking about multiple personality disorder, but in a lot of ways, there are different elements of themselves that they go, I'm safer if I go and be alone than I am if I stay, and I have to fight more of myself with what family and friends are trying to point out to me. Because as loving as the friends and family members are trying to be, what the truth that they are bringing up is just as confrontational, if not aggressive in its just existence. That for someone in my condition was to the point where we're going, I can't do this. I can't handle it. I've got to go. I've got to run away. I've got to go be alone. And that's the element of it. It's being alone. Now, a loneliness can be a couple of different things, as I brought up. I actually brought up with Matt earlier about how the Zerat that's discussed in Leviticus, when a person is found to have it after going to the priest, they're actually sent out of the camp for a period of time. And that
It's
time becomes
often translated in English as leprosy.
Oh, yes. And they're often sent out of the camp for a period of time before they come back in. And it can be a time of loneliness, but a lot of scholars will actually say it wasn't made to make them feel bad. This was a spiritual condition, and that time away gave them time, looking at a positive light, gave them time to think about what's going on, to do that self-reflection. Which is why I would actually take self-reflection and rumination to be almost two separate things in this case. Because the self-reflection, I'm not necessarily self-reflecting on what something positive in my life and trying to improve. I'm ruminating over the fact if something happened, and the ruminating ends up making me feel worse, and thus enables me to constantly live in a reality that I'm familiar with, that I've grown used to.
Sure.
I've grown used to this reality. And in a lot of ways, a lot of people stay in homelessness because they're familiar with it. They're comfortable with it. And they don't know. It's not that they don't know anything different. It's that this is what their body has reduced them to.
Sure.
Now, on the flip side of this, as I said earlier, they're not the harsh reality of truth that friends and family try to present. When it comes to friends and family, my response would be this: this is nothing against you. As much as you're trying to help, and I would not dare to imagine that people would be intentional of saying, go and be homeless. As much as a lot of people would say, I'm wanting to help you. I'm trying to help you. And so when somebody finally goes off into homelessness, it's not a reflection back on you at all. And so don't take that upon your shoulders. Please don't. The element that's going on here is that the human heart, which I'm not going to try to get into a lot of philosophy or even theology at this point, but the human heart is in and of itself focused on self. And so as a result, when you get that spiral, it's going to go straight to self instead of out or up, whether that's out to others or up to God, right? So it's going to put you deep, deep, deep inside yourself. And it can be very, very hard to pull someone out of that pit. Now, I am thankfully a success story, but not under my own power. I will say that. I had a lot of work to do, and it was God that made that work doable. He made that work effective and successful. And I'm thankful for it every day of the week. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm reminded sometimes of things I did when I was homeless. I did dumpster dive. It was a demoralizing, dehumanizing experience to feel like I have to go to the trash to get my food. Some people might look at that and say, well, that's philosophically ironic. Oh, sure. I could see that too. But at the same time, you're already feeling less than human. You're feeling very animalistic. And it doesn't help when other people make you feel even more animalistic, more less than human. So one of the answers, if it can be an answer, that I would give to our writer, our listener that wrote in about this, is that don't forget to continue to look at these people as people who are deserving of dignity and honor. They are still made in the image of God. Right. How you respond to them is one thing. You kind of have to say, you know what? No, not today. Not today. I need you to take us a couple of steps back. I will admit that, yeah, I smelled my own self when I didn't shower for a long period of time. I was offending myself with how I smelled. But at the same time, no matter how I was treating myself, please don't treat somebody that way. Please don't cement what they're thinking and feeling about themselves. Please don't cement that into them. Continue to show them how they can be treated and why they can be treated that way. God has given us so much. It is so easy to just react, but to respond takes intention, it takes deliberation. And whether that is in money or food or whatever. Now, let's get into that for a second. If it's money or food, okay, there are, and I've met plenty, when I was homeless, I ran into plenty of homeless people. There are homeless people who do it to make money. They find it as a career. I actually knew one lady who looked very homeless, grime all over her face. I even stopped a few times. This was after I was homeless, and I tried to help her a couple of times, but I got the sense of, I knew what was going on with her. And sure enough, one day I just happened to be driving by the spot she usually stands. She was already walking away, and I just happened to be turning into that same parking lot. And sure enough, she walked to a car, a very nice car. It was something, it was like a $35,000 car, something like that. And she gets in it and she drives home. And I thought, I don't want to be, this is nothing against her, but I wanted to actually support my suspicions. And I saw her drive out. I followed behind her at a distance. I was not going to confront her, and I never did, but I did saw her pull into a very nice house. There are people who will do this. There are people who will do this. There are also legitimate people who are needing help. Now, I have found that those people tend to be in two different groups. One group will wait for somebody to come to them, or the other group will actually go somewhere where they know they could get help. Now, I've found that working with those two groups, especially me being in either of those camps myself at one time or another, is that the first group that's waiting, it's a lot like that guy by the pool of Bethesda. He's sitting there just down about himself. And when Jesus asked him, do you want to get well? He goes, well, no one's here to help me. It's an excuse. Whereas the other person is making a deliberate choice. I want to get well. It's the answer to that question of, yes, I do. The other one's, yeah, maybe, not really. The other camp is definitely wanting to get help. And so I found that going to areas of a town that has a mission in it, people that are usually around that mission are usually seeking some type of help. And I'd go and sit down every now and then after I was homeless, and I would find that if I was to bring up some element of something that made them happy, that it would trigger a very positive conversation to the point where they go, I really want to go do that again. I really do. And it's like, yes. If they can find something to grab onto, something at all, even if it's just a glimmer of hope, a spark of hope, that's going to give some motivation for them to be able to come out of that, to not only give them hope, but also give them the reality that this can happen. There is something outside of this darkness. Let's take Voyage of the Non-Treader, for example. You have the Islands of Darkness, and Lord Roop has been on that island of darkness for years. He knows no other difference, and he's begun hallucinating, right? So when he's actually rescued, he still thinks he's just in a dream world, and then when he actually comes out of it, he's so surprised. Now, he's known of the reality of that, but it's become, as he said, a dream. But now, the Dark Islands have now become a dream.
Right.
And it's easy for a lot of homeless people to actually consider to kind of convince themselves that they're living in a dream. Makes it a little easier for them to deal with themselves as far as just still being human and having some sort of dignity. But when they come back into this light, the ability to see themselves, especially in light of others. Oy, in light of others. As I said earlier, people want to be helpful when they're finally willing to see that the truth isn't so barbed, despite how penetrating it can be. But when it's not so barbed, it can actually prove to be refreshing in a way, to be, well, let's continue with the analogy of Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Eustace is turned into a dragon, and Aslan takes him to that hidden garden. Eustace figures, okay, I'm a reptile, I can take stuff off, but the skin's not coming off. And so Aslan says, I'm going to have to do it for you. And he has that Eustace lay down on his back, which no reptile wants to expose their belly, but he has him lay down on his back. And as Eustace tells his cousins later, it felt as if when Aslan's paw entered into him, that it went straight to us, that it pierced his heart. And then Aslan ripped open the dragon, pulled out Eustace by the scruff of the neck, and tossed him into a pool. Now, I use that because I have found that story to be very personal for me, because it was a story that I started reading a lot towards the end of my homelessness. When I finally got to the point of asking the question, why am I so afraid to open my eyes in the morning? Why am I so angry? I had forgotten all the trauma that had brought me to the place where I was at that point, which is kind of interesting when you think about what Satan did with Adam and Eve, right? Well, especially with Eve. It kind of led Eve into the idea of it was her idea, when in fact it was Satan, and you kind of forget that part of all of that. Mm-hmm. I ended up there because of things that I believed was true. I also ended up there for very real things that did happen. But when I was able to get to the stage where I was able to ask questions, that was life-changing. And there's a lot of different things I could go into that can support that. I even have something I wrote down. I might post it with the notes on this episode that can may shed some light on that. But when I was able to find that I had a voice and that I could use it, that was definitely a turning point. But not to get too far along, but to go back real quick. So you've got these two camps that are wanting, one's, I don't really want to get well, and then the other one's, yes, I want to get well. You can only do so much for those who don't want to get well. I personally do not give out money directly. I will, if the sign says something specific, I'll go do that and bring it to them. So one sign not too long ago said, feels like I'm revealing what my left hand did. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. Okay, well, I'll just do this one story. This one guy had a sign. He said on it, I need baby stuff. And so I went, he was at a grocery store parking lot. I went to Costco and I bought a box and I brought it to him. And he says, no, you could have just gone in there. You just do that. I happen to know that there are persons, I wasn't saying this was him, but there are persons who will have those signs. They will take the item, they'll take it back inside and say, you know what, I thought I needed this, I don't, and they'll get a refund off of that and they'll keep the money. There's also
Costco, so that there was a membership.
Correct. So there are devious ways that people are intentionally being homeless and trying to make money. Yes, there are. But that does not change the fact that these are still people that deserves dignity. If they wave at you, wave at them. Don't try to ignore them, because then it's just perpetuating the idea that I was talking about earlier about ignoring the problem. Don't take on that. If I may encourage anyone in any way, don't take on that attitude towards it. They're still there. They're still standing there. So if you can at least treat them as human, you've accomplished something, in my opinion. So to not make this much longer, I will say this, that when you see someone you want to help, don't help them on terms that you think they need. Help them on terms that help them on terms that will enable them to see themselves for who they are and not continue to enforce, cement, ingrain the idea of who they think they are. And sometimes money is an answer, sometimes, but very rarely. I will tell one more quick story, and that's this, and this is to illustrate what I'm just talking about. I was at Del Taco with my kids. I go through the drive-thru. I come around. This is couple sitting on the curb. I pull up because I'm just going to sit there in the car and eat with my kid, and they come over and they say, "Hey, can we borrow $1 to get a burrito?" I said, "You know what? I'll go back through and I'll get you some." Okay. So I go back through, I bring them some food, and I get to talking with them. They were homeless. They were living in a tent on the edge of a field in some brush. And I gave them food and I gave them conversation. There's a video on YouTube of a lady sitting on a corner. A guy sits down next to her and she's just unsure of what to do. And he says, "What do you want to do?" He just sits there and she goes, "I don't know." So he just sat there quietly. And he says, "Well, what could you use?" She says, "I could really use a hug. I could use somebody's eyes to just see me." It's amazing what those little acts of kindness can actually do. And those build up. You are not going to be the final answer to somebody coming out of homelessness. If you are, amazing. If you're not, then trust God to continue the work that he's doing for that person.
Yeah. Yeah. Some plant seeds, some water, but it's God that gives the growth.
Yeah.
Our job is to go and do what he said. Go visit those in prison. Go clothe those who don't have. Go feed those who don't have. Because if we do it for them, we're by extension doing it for him. And I agree with the not giving money, giving some time or giving some food or sitting down and having a conversation is far more valuable anyway. And because we throw money at problems that doesn't validate or offer dignity to anybody. But I really think that it's up to the Holy Spirit to work with that person on what they spend any amount of money on, or to convict them if you try and spend some quality time with them or take them for a meal or something like that, and they brush you off because they want to stand at that corner and continue to panhandle. That's up to the Holy Spirit. But take the time and try to have the conversations. Take the time and show dignity, and maybe build some intentionality in your day. If you've got your kids in the back seat and you're running late for work already and you feel bad that you can't stop and talk to somebody, fine. You're already running late. You have your responsibilities and stuff. But maybe circle back around later that evening or come back over the weekend and do some intentional outreach. Go see if you can find somebody to just sit and listen to, just to communicate worth and dignity to, through word and time spent.
There is one resource I'll bring up. For me, when I came out of homelessness and the desire to want to rebuild my life, I was already aware of a website that I had used already to work in national parks, and it's called coolworks.com. It's actually, funny enough, one of the oldest websites on the internet. I think it was 1996 or 1997 that it was built. But through that website, not only did I find work that offered housing, offered food on site, which was amazing, but one of the key features that I found, I didn't actually go work at one of these places, although I think if I had, it would probably help. Because when somebody's coming out of homelessness, it's not trying to pass that on to somebody else. Great. They've got the motivation to want to go back to work. Fantastic. There are some organizations, some ranches. Can't remember any off the top of my head right now. But there are actually, there's one ranch I know of that was in Wyoming. I don't know if it's still going, but they would intentionally hire people who had either had drug problems, homelessness, or even criminal records. And they would not only give them a job, a place to sleep, and food to eat, but they'd also give them resources such as therapy and talk therapy, at least, to be able to start putting their internal lives back together. And so that could be one option if you run into somebody who is saying, I really want to work. I just don't have a place to live in order to do that. coolworks.com can be an option. So I did give that information one time to a guy, and he was so excited. He says, I'm going to go look this up right now. And I'm going, okay. And sure enough, I saw him in the library on the website looking through the job listings. I was like, that's fantastic. That's great. I hope that works out for him. So I've actually appreciated bringing this up and talking about it. It's not something I do. I generally leave these types of discussions to one-on-one. But I've appreciated the environment that Matt and I've gotten to create in this space of our podcast. I very much thank Matt directly for the friendship he has developed with me and my ability to be able to look him in the eye and talk about these things and trust him. But at the same time, I'm thankful for our listener who wrote in this question.
Yes.
Not only did it give me an opportunity to think about some things, but I appreciate the courage that you took to send it. I know it wasn't easy, and I appreciate you doing it. I hope that this episode encourages you, enables you, and that you can find some way with it to engage with homelessness that will meet to the growth and benefit of you as well as to the person in front of you.
Yeah.
So with that said,
excellent. Well, continue to write us, tell us your thoughts and how you minister to the homeless, or other questions about the book of Joel or about this topic or any others. We are beardedbiblebrothers@gmail.com. We check that very, very frequently, and we love to hear more from you. And until next time, God bless, and we'll talk to you later.